Hello and welcome to Biblical Truth Through Video Games. Today I am once again going to be talking about Watchdogs. Now I got through the main storyline of this game and I want to talk a little bit about the plot. So this is going to have some spoilers, so be forewarned. But again, I described the premise of this game once before, but for those who didn't see that video, I'll briefly go through it again. In this game, you are a hacker named Aiden Pierce. And as being a hacker, you do a lot of activities that are outside the law, a lot of activities that upset the police force and others as well. And so to give a backstory, throughout the course of being a hacker, Aiden has upset a lot of people, and some of those people want him taken out. So they've actually hired somebody to go and do that. So this is backstory before the game actually begins. There is a scene where Aiden is driving his car, and he has a sister and a niece and nephew, and the niece and nephew are with him in the car, and this guy Maurice has been hired to take him out. And so Maurice drives up right next to him, takes out a gun, and points it at Aiden. And as he's doing this, he looks in the back seat, and the niece turns around and looks right at him. And he sees the niece, just a kid in the car, and he falters a little bit. So instead of shooting Aiden, he lowers the gun and shoots the tire out, forcing a car accident, and then he drives away. The result of this accident is Aiden lives, but the niece does not. Aiden and the nephew are alive, but the niece dies. And this greatly upsets Aiden, as you can imagine, so he dedicates his life to finding out who did this and to enact revenge. And so as the game opens up, in your first mission, you confront Maurice, actually capture him as Aiden. You capture Maurice and you take him hostage, again with the purpose of enacting revenge against the death of Aiden's niece. But as this scene progresses, it becomes obvious to Aiden that Maurice did not act alone in this incident, that he was hired by others. So for Aiden, it's not enough just to take revenge on Maurice. He also wants to take revenge on anybody else who was involved in any way of his niece's death. So he goes, and tries to do this, and in so doing, he does a lot of more things against the law, and he is actually gaining a lot of notoriety with his actions. The Chicago Police Department are determined to stop him. He's becoming infamous, if you will, and he's being labeled a vigilante who must be stopped at any cost. But none of this phases Aiden. He just wants to stop and kill whoever was responsible for the death of his niece. Now, as the game progresses and his actions get more and more aggressive, his enemies take notice and they get more aggressive as well. And at a certain point in the game, his sister is actually kidnapped. And now, in addition to getting revenge on those who are doing him harm, he obviously wants to save his sister. So he goes about in attempts to do that, and about 3/4 into the game, he is able to successfully save his sister. But in so doing, his sister realizes that the famous vigilante in the news is actually her brother, and this horrifies her. And she realizes she has to leave town. She has to take her son, Aiden's nephew, and leave Chicago. And so Aiden drops her off at the train station, and before she leaves, she turns to Aiden and says, growing up, I've always looked up to you, and I've always followed you wherever you go, but I'm not following you anymore. And then she leaves. And in a prior video, I compared unforgiveness to a poison, where you drink the poison and expect the other person to die. And here, this unforgiveness poison, Aiden is drinking, and he's experiencing the full consequences of this. Now, really, the only family he knows is estranged and leaving his life. And yet he persists, and he is still determined to take out anybody who was involved with his niece's death. Really, I think he thinks that the only thing that's going to give him peace is doing that. So he goes and he does that. One by one, he takes out his enemies. And this whole idea of revenge, unforgiveness, the Bible talks a lot about that. And I wanted to share a couple of verses with you. I'm going to start with Ephesians 4:31-32, where it tells us to let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice, and be kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God, for Christ's sake, has forgiven you. And I want to share a second verse in Matthew 6:14-15 that reminds us, if you forgive their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you forgive not men their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. So these two verses, they talk about there's two different benefits to forgiving one another rather than harboring resentment and trying to get revenge. The first one says that all this anger and bitterness, if you forgive, you can just let that go. And you think that that by harboring this, you're gonna, like Aiden thought, I'll show my enemies, I'll show them what's going on. I'll kill them and I'll get justice. But really, what you're doing is and what I've been doing so many times is, I see something that's wrong with me, and I just harbor all this anger and bitterness, and it turns me into something ugly, something not good, and it really doesn't do much for the other people. I mean, I don't try to kill them, but a lot of times I think that I'm justified in having this anger and rage, but it doesn't really hurt them at all. It hurts me, and it affects my life, and it affects my interactions with the people around me. So, letting that go and forgiving is a way for me to release my anger. And then the second verse in Matthew, it tells us not only will that happen, will I be able to release my anger and get a sense of peace, but everything that I've done wrong to others, God will forgive me if I forgive others. So there's really two significant benefits to forgiveness. That being said, it's not an easy thing to do, and Aiden in this game really struggled with it. And in the final scene, once he's gotten rid of everybody else, he comes back to Maurice, and as the player, you're given the decision as to whether Aiden forgives Maurice and lets him go, or doesn't forgive him and ends up shooting him. And I think this is a really fitting way to end the game, because forgiveness is a conscious choice, and it's one that's often not easy to make. So I wanted to share that with you. Thanks so much for listening. And next week I'll be sharing a biblical truth once again through the game, The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Thank you.